Good afternoon. I'm Gay Steen. It's October 15th, 2002. We're ready to interview George Chandler. George, can you tell me where you were born?
Born in Wichita.
So you're from Wichita originally.
Yes.
When did you come to Pratt?
In 1948.
All right.
I got back from the military service. I got out of military service in 46 and worked for my brother in the bank at Lyons for a little while, and then
I see.
came to Pratt in 48.
Okay, where did you do your well, where were you sworn in?
I was sworn in Leavenworth in November of 1941, just before the war started.
So you were an early...
Well, I was
Did you enlist?
Yes, aviation cadet, and you enlisted as an aviation cadet, and if you were accepted, why, then you were sworn in, and they told us when we were sworn in, now, we don't have any training classes yet open, but we'll notify you when the training will start. And of course, then December 7th was about 3 weeks later, and they notified us right away.
So did you want to be a pilot when you
yes,
enlisted?
yes.
So that was part of...
That was my...
Okay.
We could see what was going on in Europe, and it was just
You knew.
almost, the war had been going on for years there, in 39. And so it was a pretty sure bet that we were going to get in the war. And I'd already flown airplanes and I had a pilot's license and wanted to fly airplanes if I had to go to war. Well, that's what I wanted to do. So I enlisted as an aviation cadet.
Where did you take your training?
The first training was a primary training, and the primary trainers at Hemet, California. And the second basic training was at Lemoore, California. And the advanced training was at Phoenix at Luke Field.
And then you specialized as a fighter
Well,
pilot.
at Luke Field, we were being trained to be fighter pilots, and that
Okay.
pleased me no end.
That was your choice.
I thought that was going to be a lot more interesting to be a single pilot rather than a part of a crew on a bomber.
Now, were you married at this time?
No, I was courting a little lady in Wichita, and Barbara Slothor, and you couldn't be married as an aviation cadet. If you married while you were a cadet, you were put out of the training program.
Really?
So when you graduated as a cadet, you got your certification as a pilot, and you got your reserve commission as a second lieutenant, and then your orders to active duty as a commissioned officer reservist on active duty. And you could get married then. So I got my sister in California to come over to Phoenix to be chaperone for this little girl, Barbara, to come out from Wichita and be there for my graduation. And I was going to propose marriage to her. And when I got my graduation orders in an envelope, why, here were all of these things I was supposed to get and my orders to go overseas immediately. So I thought that was hardly appropriate to propose marriage, and I put that off.
Now, did she know you were that near to proposing?
No, well, she sensed it, but I hadn't said it.
Uh-huh.
And so I didn't say it, and I didn't think that was fair to her. So as soon as I got back from overseas, why, we were married right away.
Well, can you tell me about your orders and your mission? And
Well, at that time, we went from Luke Field to Hawaii, and I was assigned to a fighter squadron out on the north end of Hawaii, flying the P-40 airplanes. And that was where I got my real first active training in a fighter squadron, flying fighters and doing fighter missions. We didn't have any enemy opposition, but we were flying the missions like we would have. And so then, in a little before Christmas, I was ordered to New Guinea and flew fighters, P-40 fighters there, and flew combat missions, but never ran into the Japanese airplanes when I was flying a P-40. And then the Army Air Force, in their strange way, my orders came through that I was to be returned to Hawaii, 2,000 miles back across the Pacific, or more, I guess, and then sent to Guadalcanal to another fighter squadron. But this time I was assigned, and happy to be assigned, the P-38 fighter, which was the one with two engines, and a lot more range, and it was a better fighting airplane than the P-40 was. So then I flew combat missions out of Guadalcanal. I first was at the squadron headquarters. It was in the back island of New Caledonia, and there I had to check out in the P-38 and learn to fly that airplane and be comfortable with it. And then went up to Guadalcanal just in about the end of June of '43, and we were starting the campaign for the invasion of our forces from Guadalcanal land forces and going up with convoy, and they were taking the Japanese airfield at Munda on New Georgia Island. And so we were assigned to cover that landing, and that was the first time that I was engaged in combat. And we met Japanese airplanes that one day of about must have been the second or third day of July of '43. And we didn't come off best in it. We lost 3 of our P-38s and pilots, and I think we shot down 2 or 3 Japanese airplanes. And it wasn't a really successful day. I had, in that mission, I had the left engine of my airplane, one little bullet hole went through the oil cooling radiator, and I didn't know it. And I was busy looking out of the airplane at what was going on rather than looking at the instruments. And pretty soon that engine went all to pieces. It had lost all of its oil, and so it said that was the end of that. So I was fortunate to be in a P-38 with 2 engines, and the good engine took me back to Guadalcanal, and that was fortunate. Then I can tell you a little story that is germane right now. We are seeing 2 Air Force pilots that they're recommending a court-martial for them in Afghanistan, that they mistakenly, and there was a mix-up in their orders, dropped bombs and killed 4 Canadians, if you remember reading about that.
It's well on the news a lot.
And that is, those sorts of mishaps come, and that's just part of war. And in July, about July 7th of '43, the Japanese came through the Kula Strait between Kolombangara and New Georgia Island, and they had a naval battle there, our Navy, and the next morning we got orders that our P-38s were to escort the B-25 bombers that were going to go up there and attack a Japanese ship that was out in what we call the slot, between the chain of islands in Guadalcanal. And our orders were very explicit from the Navy headquarters that we were to attack that ship, and then everything north of Kolombangara is enemy. We have no friendly shipping north of Kolombangara. So when you finish with this Japanese, it was either a heavy destroyer or a light cruiser. It was a warship. And so they said everything north of there is enemy attack. So the B-25s skipped their bombs into the destroyer or whatever it was, and it blew up and broke in 2 pieces and sank. And we were pretty proud of that. And so the B-25s then went on up around Vella La Vella, which is the next farthest island, and we're over them giving them protection. And they swing around, and here are 3 mortar torpedo boats headed for our shipping that is landing right down here at Rendova. And here are 8 Zeros circling over the PT boats protecting them. And our squadron commander said, okay, arm your guns and let's go. We'll take the fighters, and the B-25s will take the ships, the torpedo boats. So we went up to full power and started into the fight, and the squadron commander called, wait a minute, everybody shut off your guns. Those are Navy F-4Fs. Those got to be our PT boats. And so the PT boats kept going, and the B-25s attacked, and they blew one PT boat all to hell, and they shot down one B-25, and the F-4Fs and the P-38s just looked at each other, waiting for somebody to make the wrong move. And then we all came home and thought that's a hell of a way to run the war. Well, that happens, and I'm sympathetic to these guys in Afghanistan. They had their orders gave them the same sort of warning or ambiguity that we had, and now they're being made scapegoats.
They're going to be
and I think
court-martialed.
that's wrong.
Have you thought of talking to the Pentagon or
Oh,
trying
I've
to
written
have
letters,
you?
yes,
Good,
I have,
good.
and told them of this experience, and this was not the only time. I mean, in that war, there's a lot of mistakes that are made, and that just happens. I mean, people.
It's hard to have a clean war.
Yeah, it isn't. You know that there are going to be things that are going to happen like that, but then to try to, if they had the B-25 pilots, if they had been court-martialed for bombing a friendly PT boat, they were doing exactly what the order said: everything north of Colin Van Garrett is enemy. And here we were, I don't know, 40 miles north of Colin Van Garrett.
Right.
So that's one experience that is sort of a bad one to remember, but it's in point with what's going on right now. Then the war went on, and I was corresponding with a history professor the other day, and he's writing a history of what was going on at Guadalcanal at that time, and he wanted to know about hospital facilities. And so I wrote him of my bad experience in the hospital facilities there, that along about the first part of August of '43, I came down with appendicitis. I guess it was the campaign at Munda was still going on. They were still ground fighting at Munda. And it was interesting that the Army had brought into Guadalcanal ahead of time these teams of very fine surgeons, because they knew they were going to have a lot of battle casualties. And so our flight surgeon from our airstrip at Fighter 2 took me over to have this appendix. He diagnosed his appendicitis and took me over to the hospital and introduced me to the doctors. And he said, "Do you know that doctor that's going to do your belly surgery is the best belly surgeon in the United States?" He says he's a top man doing that kind of work. But it didn't work out so well, because their sanitation in the operating room some way broke down. I got a bad infection in the wound. But the point of it was that here the hospital was a big, long tent, and it had beds all down two sides of it. And that first night, I had surgery that afternoon, and they came down through there and just threw a Purple Heart on every bed. Everybody got a Purple Heart. Purple Heart is supposed to be given at a ceremony, but they just threw it on the bed.
Maybe they didn't think they were going to make it for the ceremony.
Then they went down and took the names off, and they showed appendicitis. They took it back away from me.
Oh, did they?
So that was, and the young man that was in the bed beside me was shot up at Munda, and he died that night. I got acquainted with him, but he was dying. So then the bad part of it was they were just overwhelmed, but they took the stretcher, non-ambulatory guys out of the hospital, out of the ward, and took them down into the bomb shelter. And they built a big dugout with a bulldozer, big shelter, and had covered it with logs and then put coral rock over the top. It wouldn't stand a direct hit, but it'd stand a pretty close hit. And they had shelves in there, wooden shelves, and they just put a stretcher in on that shelf. And the shelves were about that far apart, and they just had guys stacked in there like cordwood, which was what they had to do. So there was a dim light they had down in there, and it was very uncomfortable, hot and
depressing,
smelly and everything else. And they had a corpsman, the attendant, who was supposed to be down there taking care of you, or seeing that things were cared for. Well, he didn't want to be down there. So he just went up topside and just left everybody down there. And this one guy got out of his stretcher and onto the floor, and he had been a pilot, he was not a fighter pilot, and in a crash he'd had part of his head torn clear off, the skull torn away, and they had him all bandaged up, and he was crawling around on the floor on his hands and knees, and every time he would butt his head into the end of the stretcher, why, he'd thrash around like a chicken with his head off, just flopping all around the floor. And I'd keep yelling for this corpsman to get yourself back down here, and he'd pay no attention. So in the morning, when the doctors who were officers came through, why, I said they came to my place, where I was in this little slot back in here, and I said, that SOB, I want his name and his serial number. I'm going to court-martial him. And this guy says to the officer, the doctor, he says, that guy's been out of his head all night long. I'll give him another shot. And I said, you're going to give me a shot of morphine, but I'm going to give you a shot from my 45 just as soon as I can get out of this damned hospital. I'm going to come back and kill you.
Wow.
And the doctor said, oh, quiet down. I told him, I said, here's what happened. And he would hardly believe me. I said, when we have the court-martial, I'll find plenty of these guys that will be witness. So I was then afraid of this guy with the corpsman with the needle. I mean, he was...
Yes. You were in a
easy for him
vulnerable situation.
Yeah, easy for him to kill me with an overdose of morphine. So they took me back up and into the hospital bed, and I figured you better get out of there. So I went AWOL from the hospital and walked out of there and got out on the road and thumbed a ride back up to my squadron. And the flight surgeon said, what are you doing here? And I said, I won't live down there. And I told him about it. He said, well, we'll put you on a hospital ship. There's one in the harbor right now. I'll put you on that hospital ship tomorrow. So I didn't get to go back and settle up with that SOB. But I got on a hospital ship and went to New Zealand. So that's a bad experience of war. And let's see what else would be interesting. Of course, I've been so much involved in the Yamamoto mission. In April of '43, before I got up to Guadalcanal, I was still at New Caledonia checking out in the P-38s. Our intelligence had broken the Japanese code, and they knew that Admiral Yamamoto, who was the admiral who had planned the attack on Pearl Harbor and was their very best admiral, he was a living genius as an admiral, as a commander of a fleet. And they found he was going to make a trip from Rabaul down to, and there was a little confusion of whether it was going to be Balali Airfield at the end of Bougainville right out of Shortland Island, or whether it was going to be at Bouen Airfield on Bougainville. But anyhow, the Navy, who was in command on Guadalcanal, didn't have any airplanes that had range enough, fighters, to go from Guadalcanal clear up to Bougainville and intercept him. So they had to let the Army do it. And that hurt them. They didn't want the Army to have that mission.
Right.
But the P-38s were the only airplanes that would do it. So our squadron commander, John Mitchell, led 16 airplanes up there, and they got there right on time and met them. There were 2 bombers and 6 Zero fighters. And the killer flight of 4 went in to attack them, and the other 12 went up to give top cover because there were about 70 Zeros on Bouen Airfield that were going to be coming up, they figured. So anyhow, Rex Barber got in there first and shot down Yamamoto, and Tom Lanphier has claimed that he did it, and they're both dead now, but we've tried to we have an organization called the Second Yamamoto Mission Association, and we're trying to get history accurately recorded.
Yes.
We've got the proof now that Lanphier did not attack the Yamamoto airplane. He said the airplane he attacked, he shot the wing off of, and the Yamamoto airplane in the jungle didn't have the wing shot off of it. And Barber attacked the Yamamoto airplane. Everybody knows he was first, and the Japanese surviving pilot has signed an affidavit that he saw the P-38 first attack the Admiral's airplane from 6 o'clock position, And that's what Barber said he did. And Yanagia says he saw the airplane go on into the jungle in the attitude of a forced landing, not a out-of-control crash like one that would have a wing shot off.
So you got that clarified.
And we thought so, but we haven't been able to get the Office of Air Force History to acknowledge our proof and change the official records. We're not done yet, but we're still working on that here 50
Still
years,
pending.
50 years later. So let's see, what else might be of interest? Oh, two missions that I might mention that one turned out badly and the other turned out, for me, better. This is later, this is Christmas, or a little after Christmas of 43 and up into January of 44. And we were now, the main Japanese base in all of that part of the world, the ocean, was at Rabaul. And the airplanes from the 5th Air Force in New Guinea were attacking Rabaul, and the airplanes from Guadalcanal and up through the Solomons and the Navy carriers were attacking Rabaul. And so on this day, the B-25 airplanes, which are an attack two-engine bomber, were going to attack the Japanese airfield at Rapopo and strafe and frag bomb the airplanes on the ground. And our P-38s were ordered to be right on top of them, protecting them from the Zeros that would be attacking them. And so we went in pretty low. I mean, the B-25s were perhaps 1,000 feet off the ground, and we were perhaps 2,000 feet above them, and the Zeros were above us and making attacks. And we were watching and keeping track of what was going on. And I saw this one Zero coming down from the left, was going to attack. I could see he was setting up to attack the squadron commander, who was up and to the left of my flight. And I had lots of speed, because you go into a fight with full power, and the airplane store up as much kinetic energy and speed as you can. And so I watched that, and then I saw a Zero coming straight over me, going the other, exactly opposite direction. But he was so near my height that I didn't figure that there was any possibility that he could turn that airplane around and attack me with all the speed that I had going, and I was going to attack this airplane, the Japanese Zero, coming down on Hank Lawrence. So I just sort of marked him off. And I went for this guy, but that guy was good enough that he timed that Zero, and he spun it around, or did a, I don't think he could have done a split S, because he didn't have 500 feet above me. But anyhow, the next thing I knew was I could hear gunfire, and you can hear the guns of the enemy airplane, and the left engine was just spouting a big blue plume of flame that was going halfway back to the tail. And I can still remember the heat, that radiant heat on the side of my face. And I thought, well, I've got to get out of this, because that kind of a fire will burn back through into the wing and into the gas tank, and then the whole thing goes up. And I pulled it up to roll it over and bail out, and I could see on this hill, little hilltop, this 4 guns, what they call a quad mount, and they were shooting at me just like blink, 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 blink with those guns. And I thought, George, if you get out of the airplane, they'll get you in the parachute for sure.
Yes.
You better stay in this airplane. So I rolled it back over and got my marbles. You're excited by this time.
Oh, I can imagine.
And so I sort of got my mind working again, and reached down and shut off the fuel valve on the floor to the engine, and it was still running. And then I thought of the mixture control, and I shut off the mixture control to that engine, and the fire went out right now, instantly. So now I've got an airplane that is not on fire anymore, and the right engine is running at full power, the airplane's still flying, and I hit the feathering switch, turned the feathering switch, and that feathered the propeller, stopped the engine, and now this thing's flying pretty well. I mean, I'm down low on the trees, and I'm not a fighting airplane now, but I'm flying, and it's running good. And by this time, the B-25s, the lead of the long procession of them, had attacked Rapopo and were coming back, going home. So I cut inside of him to fly up alongside of a B-25 so his top turret would be giving me some protection. And I did snuggle in real close. And then up ahead, I could see there were gun positions on all the little hills around there. And you could see this gun position firing at the B-25 and at me. And the B-25 was firing at the gun position, and they were just trading head-on shots. Well, the gun position on the ground won because the B-25 smashed into the top of the hill and bounced up and rolled over and into the jungle and exploded. And now I'm out there with no B-25 for cover, and I looked up and saw a Zero fighter just starting an attack on me from high on the right-hand side. And so I turned underneath him to make him steepen his dive, and the jungle was too close. He couldn't go past me and pull out in time, and he couldn't get in gun range of me, and I was turning under him so he couldn't get on my tail. So he swung out to go over this way, and then he was going to turn around and come back, and I was turning to meet him, and this F-4U Marine Corsair, one of our Corsairs, came down there, and this Japanese pilot didn't see him, and that Corsair just blew that Zero all in one big roaring ball of fire and went back up into the fight, and I'm going home.
Wow.
I made it on home, and that was good to have two engines. And then another day, we bombed Rabaul. The B-24s were bombing Rabaul, and we were covering them. And we went through with no problems. I mean, we fought the Zeros, but we were ahead of them all. They didn't get through to the bombers, and everything worked out okay. And we thought we didn't lose anybody, and the Zeros were not particularly aggressive. And we didn't shoot any Zeros down, but we didn't lose anybody either. So now we're 200 and some miles back home. The bombers are going back to Munda, and we're going to drop off with the bombers at our field on Treasury Island, which is about, maybe 70 miles from Munda. And we're letting down from altitude. The bombers had been at 16,000 or 15,000, and we've been up at about 20,000 and had the oxygen masks on. And so we're in a long, flat letdown, and by the time we get, we're 30 or 40 miles from our base, and we're out of the combat area, and now we're down to about, the bombers are at maybe 8,000 or 10,000 feet, and we're down to where I can unfold that oxygen mask and get that first cigarette. Mm-hmm. I lit that cigarette and said, aha. And we had heard from our intelligence officers that there was an all-silver Zero over Rabaul that was an especially dangerous adversary. He was very skilled, and to be on the lookout for him and be careful with him, but see if you could get him. And so I'm wisecracking, smart aleck, and I folded up the oxygen mask because your microphone was right in the nose mic, they called it, right in the mask. And I said, okay, now where's that all-silver Zero? Send that SOB out here and we'll show him what the world is really like. And it was about 8 or 10 seconds, and one of my flight members called, there's a bogey at 12 o'clock high, and here he comes. And it was that silver Zero. And we had guns shut off, gun sights shut off, throttled back, lean mixtures. I mean, we're cruising airplanes. We're not fighting machines. We're not. And it just takes a little time to get everything going, and I couldn't get to that guy in time. And he came through the bombers and shot down the lead bomber and went right on. Wow. And now I didn't know whether there was any more behind him. If I started chasing him and I've already used up fuel, I can run myself out of fuel chasing him and not get home and leave my whole flight. There was nothing to do but let him go. And I didn't feel good about that.
Get an opportunity that, wow. Well, we're doing this for the archives of historical accounts, so is there anything especially that you'd like to add here at the last? And that would be a memory that might be for the junior college, high school level that might be watching this to do a paper on or something like that.
Well, I suppose I look back on a war and it had to be fought,
Yes.
and it was sad to lose many good friends. And we had times when we lost a lot of good guys. But I guess you also have to say that a nation, a great nation like ours, has to have the military capability, and that military capability requires men to do it. And I guess all of the guys I know that we were together, we were all proud of what we did. We don't have any regrets about it. We were proud of what we did. If you had overs, you might do it a little differently, but at the time we were doing what we were called on to do.
Well, I think I can speak for all Americans, so we're proud of you for what you did too. George, you were born in 1921.
Mhm.
Makes you how old now?
Well, let's see. This year I would be 81.
81. And your vocation, might as well get this on the tape
Well,
here.
I am not retired, but I'm inactive at the First National Bank. My son David Chandler is Chief Executive Officer of the bank and is responsible for the day-to-day operations. But I have a nice office that I've had for many years.
Do you still go there every day?
Still go there every day, and I have a very charming and efficient lady as my office administrator, Cheryl White, and she does all my paperwork and all my filing and just does everything to make that office run wonderfully well. So I'm
Okay.
probably better treated in this life than what I deserve, but I'm thankful for it.
Well, thank you, George. It's been
All right.
nice having this
All right.
interview with you. Stay right there just for a little bit.
Oh,
Okay. Is that all right?